I'm gonna tell you why Japanese style flash brew coffee is the perfect summer drink and how to make it.
I just want days like this forever. Now I can't pull myself together. Feel like this nicer weather won't last. Go so fast.
I know you are going to love this coffee recipe. When it starts to get a little hot out, there is nothing more refreshing than an ice cold cup of coffee. And I love cold brew as much as the next person, but let me tell you, Japanese style flash brew coffee is even better. And let me tell you why. When you brew cold brew, you gotta let it sit for number one, 12 to 24 hours. So that's like a long time to wait for a cup of coffee if you're not working ahead. Also, the process of brewing cold brew brings out lots of these rich chocolatey flavors, which are very nice in their own way, but it's not like that cup of perfect pour over coffee that you would get from a cafe or make at home. When you make a Japanese style flash brew iced coffee, you get all those wonderful aromatics that come out of a pour over coffee, and you get to make it in just a couple minutes. It's literally as fast as making a cup of pour over. Now I'm gonna show you how to do this. You can make it in any pour over that you would normally make a pour over at home. You can make it in a flat bottom Kalita Wave, you can make it in Hario V60, you can make it in a CHEMEX, you can use any of your servers. This is a fantastic and flexible way to make coffee. So I'm gonna give you a couple principles and then I'm gonna show you how to make it in a CHEMEX because I'm making for two. And I know a lot of you have a CHEMEX at home as well. So we're gonna start there, but what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna put recipes and formulas for other brewers down there in the description. And I would love for you to let me know in the comments after you try this, how it turned out and what brewer you used. All right, so let's get into this. Firstly, a couple principles with Japanese style flash brew iced coffee. The way this works is you are basically going to make a hot pour over, but some of the water that you would normally put into the pour over, you're actually gonna start out as ice in your carafe underneath. What's gonna happen is over the course of the brew, the ice is gonna melt and it's going to chill your coffee. So by the time you are done the pour over, you're gonna have this ice cold, refreshing goodness in the bottom in just a couple minutes. Then what you're gonna do is you're gonna serve that into a glass over ice. Now, a couple things. Coffee ratios. For this recipe, I'm gonna use a 1:15 coffee ratio, just a hair stronger than I would normally do. Normally I would do 1:16, and we're gonna do 1:15 because when you serve it over ice at the end, a little bit of that ice is gonna melt and it's gonna dilute it. So you want it to be a little bit stronger off of the hop. Now, another thing, when we are breaking up the ice versus the water, 40% of that is gonna be ice, and 60% of that is going to be hot water. With those two principles, you can basically translate any dose, any pour over recipe into a Japanese style flash brew coffee. It's unreal. So what I'm gonna do right now, I'm gonna brew it in the CHEMEX so I can give Sarah a cup of coffee once we're all done. I'm gonna use 40 grams of coffee in the CHEMEX and 600 grams of water. Now, 360 grams of that water is going to be hot water and 240 grams is going to be ice. Now, if you are using one of these, Hario V60, or you want to do a single serve or a Kalita Wave, I will drop those recipes once again down there in the description. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to weigh out 40 grams of coffee. And I'm gonna grind it a little bit finer than normal than I would for an equivalent full hot brew. And that's because we're gonna be pouring a little bit less hot water into the actual coffee because we already got the ice underneath. So that finer grind is going to extend the contact time and it's going to allow the coffee to more easily extract. Next, I'm gonna weigh out 240 grams of ice into my CHEMEX. Next, I'm gonna put the filter in my CHEMEX. And this is a trick with the CHEMEX. When you go to rinse your filter, you'll realize pretty quickly that you can't actually take the filter out or the top off. So what I do is I just rinse it with a small amount of cold water. And now what I'm gonna do, I'm gonna just dump that out without dumping all the ice out. Gonna put in my 40 grams of coffee. All right, now it's time for our main brew. We're gonna do a long bloom. We're gonna do 1 minute. And I usually say bloom with 3 times as much water as you have in your brew. So that's 40 grams of coffee. That is a 120 milliliter or 120 gram bloom. So we're gonna do our bloom and we're gonna let it sit for 1 minute. Give it a little swirl, make sure all those beans are wet. After a minute, we're gonna pour up to the remaining 360 grams of water. So we've already got 120 grams in there. Now we're just gonna pour in the rest. Pour in slow circles. I find something that really helps with CHEMEX brews is at the end, you wanna do a long center pour. That'll help prevent any stalling. Perfect. Now we just wait for it to draw down. Now, because we use less water, it will draw down more quickly. But you want to target about the same amount of brew time as you would get from a normal pour over of the same size. That's why we grind a little bit finer to hopefully draw out that brew time. I'm going to target 3 to 4 minutes for this CHEMEX brew. If you're doing a smaller pour over, that might be 2 to 3 minutes. As the coffee is drawing down, that ice is going to melt and your carafe should feel nice and chilled. Perfect, so my coffee drew down at 3.5 minutes. That's right in the neighborhood that I would hope for a CHEMEX flash brew. Perfect. We're going to take out the filter. We've got a perfectly chilled pour over coffee in basically the same amount of time as a regular pour over. You want to swirl around to try and melt as much of that ice as possible. That's going to give you this balanced flavor. Then get 2 glasses filled with ice and serve. Perfect, and there you have it, a wonderfully refreshing summer drink. There's nothing quite like a Japanese flash brew. Now, if the flavor's a little strong when it first comes out, don't sweat it. That ice is gonna melt and it's gonna slowly dilute it for a more balanced flavor. But for now, all you gotta do is get one of these coffees to your special person and enjoy. Cheers.